Welcome to what I like to call 80s Vault After Dark. So I'm Dan, and today we're going to dive deep into the villains that defined horror in the 1980s. You see, growing up in the 80s, these weren't just the monsters on a screen. They were the shadows in our basements, the nightmares that followed us home from the video stores, and for many of us, they still linger in our minds decades later. All right, let's get started. So we're going to get started with something unseen but unforgettable. You know, this was based on allegedly true events, and this invisible force, it didn't need a mask or a weapon. It was just pure, unstoppable malevolence. I mean, what made it truly terrifying was its relentless nature. I mean, no locked door could keep it out, no light could drive it away, no priest could banish it. It attacked in broad daylight, in the supposed safety of your home, leaving its victim to face not just the horror of the attacks, but the disbelief of everyone around her. The entity, it just tapped into our primal fear of helplessness, of being alone, like, you know, against something we can't fight or even understand. And when you left the theater, every unexplained sound in your house, every cold spot, every shadow in the corner, I mean, they all meant something different now.
Drink some of this, Michael. Be one of us.
Man, I mean, Kiefer Sutherland's David, he redefined vampire cool for a new generation. I mean, this wasn't some cape-wearing count. This was the bad boy your parents warned you about. And with some good reason. I mean, the way he and his gang seduced Michael into their world, making darkness look, you know, appealing. It captured something true about teenage rebellion and the cost of it. I mean, remember the dinner scene where they trick Michael into drinking blood? I mean, it's not just shocking, it's heartbreaking, watching someone choose their own damnation because it looks so much like freedom. But at least David offered a choice. Our next entry wasn't nearly so generous.
Hi.
So what happens when addiction takes physical form? You know, the brain wasn't just a parasite. This was a metaphor for the drug epidemic that was gripping America at the time. You know, it offered euphoria while demanding increasingly terrible acts from its host. The practical effects, I mean, they were certainly grotesque, but like the real horror was watching someone lose themselves piece by piece to something they knew was destroying them. Every scene of apparent pleasure, it was just undercut with genuine dread, creating like a uniquely disturbing viewing experience that stuck with you long after the credits rolled.
Ready to beg for it, Brian? Ready to crawl across the floor and plead for my juice?
Hull House wasn't just another haunted building. It was a perfect trap for teenage rebellion gone wrong. You know, Angela's transformation from outcast teenager to demon queen captured just something unique about 80s horror. I mean, the way it mixed sexuality, rebellion, and supernatural terror. But it's the way that Angela slowly corrupts her classmates, turning their party into a descent into hell. I mean, that really gets under your skin, you know? I mean, she showed us that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who want to show you a good time, right up until the moment they show you, you know, something else entirely.
Welcome to Fright Night.
Just when we thought vampire movies were getting stale, along comes Jerry Dandridge. I mean, this wasn't your grandfather's Dracula. This was a charming neighbor who lived next door, who just happened to be, a bloodsucker. Chris Sarandon brought such charisma to the role that, you almost understood why Amy fell under a spell. The genius was in how he infiltrated suburban America, turning the safety of middle-class neighborhoods into his hunting grounds. Do you remember the dance scene? The way he seduced Amy while Charlie watched helplessly? That's what made Fright Night special. It understood the true horror isn't just about fear. It's about desire. And speaking of desire, let's talk about this next one. Everyone had heard an urban legend about a killer in the woods. The Burning took that familiar campfire story and they gave it a face, or what was left of one. Cropsey wasn't supernatural like Jason or metaphysical like Pinhead. He was a man burned beyond recognition, twisted by pain into something like just barely human. The raft scene. If you know, you know, right? It changed how an entire generation looked at summer camp. Tom Savini's effects, they made every kill feel visceral, personal even. While other slashers were becoming, more elaborate, Cropsey kept it simple. Garden shears and just pure hatred. Sometimes the simplest tools are the most terrifying.
Thought you'd love this house, Jason. That's why we bought it.
What about your new room? We got you everything you asked for.
Are we asking you for so much?
Are you eating it, or is it eating you? The stuff took our growing suspicion of corporate America, and it turned it into something literally consuming us from within. What's more terrifying than realizing your comfort food has a mind of its own? The way it moved inside its victims, the way it made them crave more, it just hollowed them out until they were just shells. And it played on our deepest fears about addiction and consumerism. That scene where the kid catches his family eating this stuff at midnight, and their faces were just twisted in euphoric smiles. That's the moment you start checking ingredient labels and a little bit more carefully.
You have death around you.
Some evils are just so ancient that they make human atrocities look trivial. When Nazis occupy this ancient fortress in Romania, they unleash something that turns their ideology of supremacy into, a sick joke. Molasar doesn't just kill. It corrupts, it tempts, and it offers power while taking everything that makes us human. The way it builds itself from light and shadow, and the way it turns the keep's defenders into its servants. It showed us that sometimes the greatest horror is watching someone choose to embrace darkness.
I repeat, a uniformed New York cop has been seen in the commission of the brutal killings occurring on the streets of the city after dark. The questions this station wants answered.
When you're in trouble, you're supposed to run toward a police officer, not away from one. But in Maniac Cop, they twisted that primal trust into something horrifying. Robert Zar's imposing presence and that expressionless face made Officer Cordell an urban legend come to life. A corrupt system turned him into a monster, and now he's dealing out his own twisted version of justice. You know what makes Cordell truly terrifying? It isn't just his strength or his badge. It's how he represents authority turned malevolent. The scene where he pulls over an innocent driver And you're watching this person do exactly what they've been taught to do with the police, like what you've been taught to do with the police, and you know it's going to get them killed. I mean, that's pure psychological horror. The way he moves deliberate and unstoppable through the streets of New York, he's just corrupting everything that the uniform stands for. That taps into our deepest fears about power and protection. You know, John Carpenter, he just understands that sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can barely comprehend. You know, this wasn't just another demon. It was antimatter reaching through mirrors to unmake reality itself. I mean, the way it turned reflective surfaces into portals and the way it corrupted physics and faith equally, it made you question everything you thought you knew about the nature of evil. But at least it stayed in the mirrors, because our next entry, it wasn't so considerate.
Right, Oscar?
Hi, I'm Oscar, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho! Ha 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 ha!
Before he became horror's favorite wisecracking doll, Chucky was just pure, undiluted nightmare fuel. Brad Dourif's performance as Charles Lee Ray gave us, a killer who, he wasn't just evil. He was having fun being evil. The original Child's Play played with our expectations masterfully. Is Andy imagining things? Is his mother going crazy? I mean, the moment when Chucky finally reveals himself to Karen, that innocent doll face twisting into pure malice. It's still one of horror's greatest reveals. By Child's Play 2, he was an established icon, but nothing matches the slow burn terror of the original. Every parent who's ever heard strange noises from their kid's room at night, they know that fear.
Right down. Now, who else is involved?
I'm with Meg Penny, and Brian Flagg was here earlier.
Flagg? Where is he now?
The remake of The Blob did something incredible. It took a 1950s B-movie, Monster, and turned it into something genuinely horrifying. This wasn't just a mindless mess. This was an intelligent predator that learned as it consumed. The way it dissolved its victims, the way it moved with a purpose, and the way it turned familiar spaces like a movie theater into death traps. It all played on our fears of both pain and being absorbed. The scene where it pulls someone down a sink drain, that's the moment you start looking differently at every drain in your house. But as terrifying as the Blob was, at least you could see it coming. Our next entry wasn't so kind. The original Leatherface, he just terrified 70s audiences. But our 80s version took a different approach. Tobe Hooper's sequel turned the backwoods horror into, a dark satire of Reagan's America, with Leatherface and his family representing the dark side of capitalism. The industrial setting and the grotesque family dynamics, and Dennis Hopper's unhinged performance created something uniquely disturbing. While the original showed us, rural horror, the sequel brought that terror into the modern world. And this suggested that monsters don't just hide in abandoned farmhouses. They might be running the local businesses. The original Alien gave us, the perfect organism. James Cameron showed us something way more terrifying. Its mother. The xenomorph queen wasn't just bigger and deadlier. She was intelligent, protective, and very calculating. I mean, the moment that she first emerges towering over Ripley, that's just pure primal terror. But it's during the nest scene that you really understand what you're dealing with here. A creature that can strategize, plan, and command an entire hive. You know, what makes the queen truly terrifying, it's her twisted reflection of motherhood. The way she tends to her eggs, and the way she directs her drones, and that way she faces off against Ripley. It's another mother fighting for a child, which creates something more complex than just a monster. I mean, the scenes in the hive where we see her massive egg sac and understanding that she's been like orchestrating everything, it fundamentally changed how we saw alien intelligence in horror. When she breaks free and chases after Ripley, you know, you're not just watching another creature feature, you're watching two mothers locked in a primal battle for survival. And sometimes the scariest monsters, they're the ones we recognize something of ourselves in.
Yo, man, it's cool. It's cool, man. It's cool.
You know, the evolution of Jason through the 1980s, it's a masterclass in character development. You know, starting with the burlap sack in part 2, each film added layers to the legend. The hockey mask came in part 3, it became iconic. But it was part 4, you know, the final chapter, that just showed us how unstoppable he could be. By the time he reached part 7, you know, the new blood, Jason was facing off against telekinetic teenager, and somehow it worked. I mean, what made him endure, though, wasn't just the creative kills. It was his tragic backstory, his ties to Crystal Lake, and his almost childlike sense of territory. You were in his home, breaking his rules, and for that, there was only one punishment. And a heavy breathing, the thunderous footsteps, they meant judgment was coming.
Where did it happen?
Down on Orange Grove.
That's right down the street.
I know.
You know, when people think about Michael Myers, they think mostly about the 1978 original. But Michael's evolution through the 80s is what cemented his legacy. Halloween 2 picked up exactly the same moment the first film ended, with Michael stalking the fluorescent lit halls of Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. I mean, the sterile environment made every footstep echo, and every shadow loomed just that much larger. By Halloween 4, he'd survived, you know, an explosion, severe burns, and just a decade in a coma. Yet still, he came back to hunt his young niece. I mean, what made Michael terrifying wasn't just his indestructibility. It was his silence and patience, his just absolute focus. Unlike our next entry, he never ran. He never showed emotion. He just walked. Relentlessly, inevitably. I mean, watching him pursue Jamie Lloyd and watching fate itself closing in.
Joel, no! No, Joel, you don't know if it's dead!
It's dead.
You know, vengeance has a name, and in 1988, Stan Winston showed us exactly what it looked like. Pumpkinhead wasn't just another monster. It was grief and rage given terrible form. I mean, the way it moved, part demon, part spider, it brought something entirely new to creature features. But you know what makes Pumpkinhead truly haunting? It isn't just its design. It's what it represents. Lance Henriksen's performance as Ed Harley grounds his supernatural revenge tale in just raw human emotion. You know, when he carried his dead son's body across that field, That's not just set up for horror. It's a father's worst nightmare made real. The price of vengeance is your soul, and watching Ed realize this as he begins to feel every death his demon inflicts. That's psychological horror at its finest. That scene where Pumpkinhead slowly turns its head, towards its next victim, moving in that impossibly fluid way. That's just terror personified. But it's the creature's connection to its summoner that elevates us beyond a simple monster movie. Every kill is felt by the person who called for revenge, making them question if vengeance, is it really worth the cost? Sometimes the real horror isn't what the monster does to others. It's what summoning it does to you. Everything you thought you knew about horror changed the moment we saw that dog explode into something impossible. Thing wasn't just a shapeshifter. It was unknowable, and it was a biological nightmare that turned evolution itself into a weapon. Rob Bottin's groundbreaking effects showed us transformations that violated every law of nature, but the real terror, it just ran deeper. In a decade defined by Cold War paranoia, The Thing showed us that the enemy might be sitting right next to us, wearing your friend's face. That blood test scene, that was just pure psychological torture. The way McReady's hands shake as he approaches each person with the hot wire, knowing any one of them could transform at any second. That's just like a masterclass in suspense. But really, what truly sets The Thing apart, it's the perfect ending. McReady and Childs, sitting in the Antarctic night, watching each other breathe. No resolution, no victory, just the creeping dread that maybe, just maybe, one of them isn't human anymore. It's the kind of ending that follows you home. It makes you look at your own friends a little bit differently, and after all, how well do you really know anyone?
Please, God.
This.
Before he became a pop culture icon with his one-liners and MTV appearances, Freddy Krueger was just pure nightmare. Robert Englund didn't just play a killer. He created something unprecedented in horror. A monster with a personality who just took genuine pleasure in his work. The burned face, the sweater, the glove, every element was designed to haunt your dreams. The original Nightmare showed us something terrifying. You could run from other killers, but you did have to sleep eventually. That scene where Tina's dragged up the wall and across the ceiling, it violated every rule of reality we thought we could trust. By the time we got to Dream Warriors, Freddy was an established force, turning each victim's deepest fears and desires against them in increasingly creative ways. That puppet scene with Philip remains, one of horror's most disturbing deaths. It's not for its gore, but just for the sheer helplessness. Freddy didn't just kill you. He isolated you, then tortured you, and it made you question your own sanity first.
The box. You opened it. We came.
It's just a puzzle box!
Oh no. It is a means.
In a decade dominated by quipping killers and mass slashers, Pinhead showed us something entirely different. Horror with a philosophy. Doug Bradley brought this chilling elegance to the role. He created a villain who was, articulate and intelligent, and somehow more frightening for it. This wasn't a monster that wanted to kill you. It wanted to expand your understanding of pain and pleasure until your mind shattered. The first Hellraiser introduced us to the leather-clad priest of hell, but it was Hellbound where Pinhead truly came into his own. I mean, the labyrinth sequence showed us his world, where pain was the art and suffering was transcendence. The moment that he appears in the hospital hallway, just casual as a doctor making rounds, the doctor's in, it's terrifyingly precisely because he's so calm and so certain. What makes Pinhead the ultimate 80s horror villain isn't just his unique look or his elegant threats. It's what he represents. In a materialistic decade obsessed with pleasure and excess, he showed us the ultimate price of pushing just too far. He wasn't evil in any simple sense. He was beyond human morality, offering an experience of the infinite through ultimate suffering. Angels to some, demons to others. It wasn't just a tagline. It was a philosophical statement about the nature of experience itself. Most importantly, Pinhead never lost his terrifying dignity. While other 80s villains became almost cartoonish over time, he remained what he always was, a dark priest of pain, waiting patiently for those to solve his puzzle box. In the end, that's what makes him the most frightening. The knowledge that somewhere, even now, the Cenobites are just waiting, and some part of us wants to solve the puzzle, even knowing what awaits afterwards. And there you have it, 20 villains that just defined horror in the 80s. Each one touched something primal in our fears. Each one changed the genre in its own way. But these final three, and they showed us that horror could be more than just scares. It could be an art. Dark, disturbing, but beautiful art that still haunts us decades later.